Great, thank you to the joint support team for those logistics. And it's my turn now, distinguished co-chairs, distinguished members of the Global Partnership on Effective Development Cooperation, distinguished participants that are joining us for today's webinar, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to be allowed to moderate this webinar today. As a global partnership on effective development cooperation, it is important that we take the time every now and then, and particularly in this current context, to ask ourselves whether development cooperation is being as effective as it should, whether things are all right, let's say in a machine room if you want. And therefore, we felt it important as co-chairs to establish a set of, and to propose a set of webinars in which we would deal with some critical questions together with you, with the members, with the interested participants around these important themes. Today, we would like to focus on three important sets of questions. You have them now on the screen in front of you. The first one is, what are the biggest effectiveness challenges in your country? Reflecting, for example, on the global partnership monitoring. What are the main challenges for staying true to the 4 principles for effective development cooperation in today's new realities? And what collective actions are necessary? The second set of questions that we would like to discuss today is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected any or all of these challenges? Has COVID-19 also led to accelerating any welcome developments? I mean, we know about the challenges, but perhaps there were also some interesting positive developments that we should share with each other. If so, how can such changes and the momentum be sustained in the spirit of building back better and to fast track the decade of action for SDG implementation? And the third set of questions, ladies and gentlemen, is, how have you been able to mobilize your development cooperation stakeholders to follow up on effectiveness issues and commitments, including in the follow-up to the global partnership monitoring? What are the emerging lessons? So basically, we want to sit together around this virtual table today and ask ourselves, are we still doing the right things in terms of the development cooperation? Is our development cooperation effective in the current context? Where are there some things that have to be changed, and or that have to, some lessons, important lessons that have been learned? We have a very interesting program today. But before I go into the program, maybe I can ask for the next slide. I would like to just place this webinar into a context and remind you, and especially those of you who have not been actively participating in the Global Partnership on Effective Development Cooperation, just to explain where we are in the current work plan. So we did have the, in summer, in July 2019, we did have the senior level meeting in New York, back to back with the high level political forum. This was followed in December 2019 in Seoul, actually, by a meeting of the Busan Forum and the steering committee of the GPEDC. And then earlier this year, in May, we had another meeting of the steering committee, the 19th meeting, actually. It was in New York, but we were already in a virtual, we were already meeting virtually around the, using Zoom. Since then, we have been adapting our programs, and we are gearing up for the month of December, 9th to 10th of December. We are gearing up for the next steering committee meeting of the GPEDC. So this is where we are right now. We are in between on that middle part of the inverted S. Okay, I'm being told that some people are having sound problems, but I think I'm still going to continue. I think okay. Can I just have a confirmation from the joint support team that you can hear me?
Yes, Mr. Gas, it seems,
Okay.
This is Yumna from JST. It seems many people can hear, but there are some people that cannot hear. I think it is because you guys are not connected with the audio. The bottom left corner, you have to connect the audio. So you have to click on the arrow and connect audio. Ben from IT, if you have any further comments, please speak now. Thank you.
So what you're saying is where that little microphone is at the bottom left, there is an arrow that's pointing upwards. If you click on that arrow, you can choose which speaker is supposed to function. And if you choose the right speaker, you should be able to hear me. Okay, so we will continue. I'm hoping that the people who are having difficulties with the sound, that they can solve their problems using the chat directly with our secretariat. So we have a very interesting program this afternoon, and this program entails two opening keynote addresses. The keynote address by our colleague, Secretary of the Economic Division of the Ministry in Bangladesh, Ms. Fatima Yasmin, on behalf of Mustafa Kamal, and then Her Excellency, the Vice Prime Minister or the Deputy Prime Minister, Ms. Elise Tamukumwe from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then this will be followed by a panel discussions with 5 eminent panelists and a group discussions where we will be collecting comments and questions from you all. So with that being said, I would like to begin and actually give the mic to and give the floor to Ms. Fatima Yasmin, Secretary, Economic Division of the Ministry of Finance in Bangladesh. Ms. Yasmin, you have the floor. I think tu peux unmuter Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, my fellow co-chairs of GPEDC, distinguished panelists, discussants, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening from Bangladesh. As a on behalf of Honorable Finance Secretary, Mr. Mustafa Kamal, I am joining in this session. I join with colleagues and co-chair Ambassador Thomas in welcoming you once again to this important webinar on development effectiveness in the context of current challenges. Distinguished participants, in last February, the coronavirus pandemic struck the world economy with the biggest shock since the Second World War. Lockdowns and nearly shutdowns of the international trade developed a fear of deep recession, loss of millions of jobs, suddenly threatening large spikes for the short-term poverty and inequality. Like many other developing countries, COVID-19 has hard hit Bangladesh with its serious impacts. These include sharp decline in domestic demand and disruption of trade, production, and supply. Bangladesh government, under the prudent leadership of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, has rolled out a stimulus package worth of 13 billion, which is 4% of the GDP, to overcome the negative impacts of the pandemic. While the global economy is engulfed with uncertainty and still fearing the greatest slowdown of the history, Bangladesh's performance in export remittance are returning, are showing the sign of recovery due to the measures taken by the government. A prudent balance between the lives and the livelihood under the able guidance and pragmatic leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has not only saved the lives from the pandemic, but also returned jobs to millions and protected the most vulnerable section of the society. Ladies and gentlemen, the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation remains committed to the principles and ethos of development effectiveness. And it is more important when it comes to dealing with the shared global challenges. There is no alternative to principle-based international collaboration. The senior level meeting of 2019 of GPEDC made it very clear that the effectiveness principles are the most critical elements for achieving SDGs. In the context of current challenges, country ownership matters for engaging in effective COVID-19 responses. We call upon the development actors to align their responses with the country system and the priorities. Inclusive partnership is now more important than ever before. Bangladesh government is trying to combat the pandemic with the help of all actors, including the private sectors and CSOs. We are now revising the development results framework of the 8th five-year plan in the context of COVID-19 to have greater impact by using limited resources guided by those results. We expect that the development partners would keep this development results framework in mind while designing their support measures. Government has adopted various measures like introducing online development assistance information management system, digitalization of financial system. With greater advancements in the speed of power of science, international collaborations are required to provide knowledge, experience about the pandemic. We also expect that our every piece of response should be guided by the principles of mutual accountability and transparency to ensure effective development cooperation for overcoming the shared challenges. GPEDC as a global multi-sectoral platform has been spearheading to localize the development effectiveness principles at the country level. In Bangladesh, we have a local consultative group, which is a dialogue platform between the government and the development partners to ensure effective development cooperation to achieve our common goals. Efforts are underway to make this platform more effective, particularly for ensuring more concerted and coordinated efforts during this pandemic. The last Global Partnership Monitoring Survey revealed commendable success in many areas of effective development cooperation in our country, while there are areas which have still room for much improvement. The behavioral change of the stakeholders based on the results of monitoring exercise are critical for ensuring country-level implementation of development effectiveness principles. The monitoring exercise should be evolved to compel the behavior change of the development actors. Dear participants, this pandemic, unlike other global crises in history, has put formidable challenges on two fronts, life and the livelihood. The developing countries need extensive, long-term, low-cost financial support to overcome the adverse economic and social impacts. We are witnessing with great concern that the scope of mobilization of development assistance in concessional term has become less than previous years because most of the development partners have already adjusted their financial terms and conditions either by shortening maturity and grace period. We would like to request the development providers to continue with more concessional assistance in addition to their unfaltering commitment to making the development assistance effective to overcome the challenges of current humanitarian crisis. We expect this webinar will place the effective principles at the core of its discussion and figure out how these principles will reinforce the efforts of development cooperation actors in tackling COVID-19 crisis. This webinar will also provide valuable inputs for the next steering committee meeting of GPEDC. I wish the best in your deliberations and look forward to substantive outcome. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, distinguished Secretary Yasmin. And I want to also take the moment, also the opportunity to acknowledge the presence of His Excellency, the Secretary of Finance, Mr. Kamal. It's good to see you also here with us.
Yes, Excellency, Mr. Mustafa Kamal is the Finance Minister of Bangladesh.
Okay, my apologies. So, Excellency, great pleasure to see you with us here. Now, I would like to give the floor to Her Excellency, the Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Planning, Her Excellency Ms. Elise Tamokumwe. She will address us in French, I believe. So please use the interpretation if you need to listen, if you need to hear her in English. Sur ce, Excellence, Madame la merci d'être avec nous.
Merci beaucoup.
Je donne très volontiers la parole.
Pour le modérateur, merci beaucoup Thomas. Bonjour à tout le monde, cher co-président, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs. Je suis ravi que nous puissions nous rencontrer une fois de plus virtuellement à l'occasion de ce premier webinaire qui inaugure la série et qui sera axé sur les perspectives des pays partenaires au sujet des questions d'efficacité les plus pressantes, des défis et des leçons apprises du partenariat mondial en pleine mutation dans le contexte marqué par la COVID-19. En effet, point n'est besoin de rappeler que cette pandémie de COVID-19 a fondamentalement impacté le contexte mondial du développement et menace nos réalisations ainsi que les gains acquis au prix d'énormes sacrifices en matière de développement. Comme je l'ai mentionné lors de la 19e réunion du comité de pilotage, des millions de personnes qui étaient sorties de la pauvreté y sont ramenées par la pandémie. Les progrès réalisés par le monde dans la lutte contre la pauvreté sont gravement menacés car le coronavirus met les pays dans une impasse, obligeant les dirigeants à revoir les priorités et ajuster les politiques pour répondre efficacement aux besoins des populations, surtout dans les pays fragiles où les chocs sur les plans économiques et social sont les plus sévères. Fort heureusement, il est annoncé de bonnes perspectives mondiales et nous avons considéré cette pandémie comme une opportunité qui nous apprend une nouvelle manière de travailler ensemble. La preuve, c'est que nous continuons à travailler encore plus efficacement, même si nous ne pouvons pas nous rencontrer physiquement. Mesdames et messieurs, comme la plupart des pays en développement, la République démocratique du Congo doit faire face à de nombreux défis dans sa quête d'obtenir une vie meilleure pour tous ses citoyens. Notre engagement commun pour l'atteinte de l'agenda 2030 nous offre un thème fédérateur pour tous les pays du monde. Les principaux défis que doit relever la République démocratique du Congo pour garantir l'appropriation et le focus sur les résultats, les partenariats inclusifs et la responsabilité mutuelle sont notamment un leadership et un engagement politique fort, une culture de redevabilité, une mobilisation accrue des ressources domestiques pour financer le développement, une meilleure coordination des ressources extérieures et tirer profit de la coopération sud-sud et triangulaire. Pour relever ces défis, nous devons créer des cadres de dialogue permanents entre tous les acteurs au développement en vue de proposer des solutions idoines qui concentrent nos efforts vers l'atteinte des résultats collectifs. La situation de la COVID-19 est un exemple éloquent qui convie le monde et tous les acteurs au développement à la plus grande solidarité. C'est dans cette optique que le gouvernement de la République démocratique a abordé de manière participative, conformément au poste, le soutien à la stabilité et à la relance économique et le soutien aux populations. Ce programme adopté par le gouvernement et lancé par le président de la République a fortement bénéficié de l'appui de nos partenaires au développement, dont les Nations Unies, à travers le plan d'appui à la réponse socio-économique immédiate à la COVID-19 en République démocratique du Congo. Le pays a enregistré au 18 octobre 2020 environ 303 morts contre 11 000 cas de contamination confirmés. À cela, il faut ajouter une forte baisse des recettes d'exportation et ressources domestiques à la suite des mesures prises par le gouvernement pour limiter la propagation de la pandémie, sans compter les questions sociales que cela soulève. Sans les mesures du gouvernement et l'appui des partenaires au développement, la République démocratique du Congo aurait dû connaître une situation plus déplorable. Cette expérience de la COVID-19 au cours de l'année a conduit le gouvernement à renforcer ses liens avec ses partenaires en cherchant des solutions conjointes à la crise liée à la pandémie, ce qui conduit certes à un focus sur les résultats, l'appropriation et l'inclusivité. Bien entendu, les évaluations de la mise en œuvre du programme multisectoriel d'urgence nous permettront au moment opportun à la recevabilité mutuelle. Dans cette perspective, il nous faut des efforts concertés et des politiques ciblées pour adresser nos défis de développement que sont l'élimination de l'extrême pauvreté, la création des emplois et l'accès aux services sociaux de base, l'amélioration de la gouvernance et le renforcement de l'autorité de l'État, le renforcement de la résilience par la diversification de l'économie, la résorption du déficit infrastructurel, la protection de l'environnement et la lutte contre le changement climatique. Tous ces défis sont susceptibles d'être relevés que si nous mobilisons davantage des ressources domestiques pour notre développement. Mesdames et messieurs, les leçons apprises au cours des 6 derniers mois dans la quête des solutions à la crise liée à la COVID-19, dont les effets sont perceptibles auprès de nos populations, sont entre autres la nouvelle manière de travailler avec nos partenaires. Il nous faut travailler ensemble pour plus de résultats. Il nous faut une plus forte complicité entre les gouvernements, les organisations de la société civile et le secteur privé. Il nous faut plus de synergie entre les acteurs humanitaires, de paix et de développement pour atteindre les résultats que nous voulons ensemble dans les États fragiles. Nous devons persévérer. Nous devons préserver nos principes chers dans toutes nos actions, à savoir l'appropriation nationale, le focus sur les résultats, l'inclusivité, la transparence et la redevabilité en regardant dans la même direction pour atteindre ensemble les objectifs de l'agenda mondial. Plusieurs pays, comme la République démocratique du Congo, se sont engagés à mettre en place un cadre pour accélérer la mise en œuvre des objectifs du développement durable, notre agenda commun. Il ne reste plus qu'à dire merci une fois de plus aux coprésidents et à tous les participants à ces webinaires. Nous espérons que nous aurons des échanges fructueux pour aider nos pays à faire face aux défis de notre environnement. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Vice-Première ministre. Thank you very much for this strong statement, both received on behalf of the Ministry of Finance in Bangladesh and behalf of the Minister of Planning in the DRC. In both cases, a strong emphasis on the principles for effective development cooperation, but also you heard it in both of these keynote addresses, the importance of adapting to the crisis, of mobilizing partnerships, multi-stakeholder partnerships, partnerships in the nexus between the humanitarian, the development, and the peace building. But also, and we heard it from the ministry in Dakar, the importance of using digital instruments and online platforms to mobilize the donors and to provide, to make the information flow more rapidly. I want to now ask the joint support team to put on a slide, and I'm going to have a little moment of interaction where we are going to ask you, in your opinion, which is the principle of the 4 principles of development, of effective development cooperation, which is the one that is the most stressed, that is the most placed in difficulty by the COVID response. So you have the possibility now on the screen in front of you, you have the possibility to click on one of these choices, either country ownership, the focus on results, inclusive partnerships, or transparency. And we will be recording this on behalf of you. Of course, this is not a very detailed exercise. We are going to have a much more detailed exercises with you in the future on these questions, but we wanted to allow everyone to participate and to say where they see the biggest problems going ahead. And it's interesting to see there. You could see in front of you the percentages moving with currently inclusive partnerships at about 47%. About nearly half of you feel that the most difficult part of moving forward on the effectiveness agenda in the COVID-19 context is the inclusive partnerships, and about 30% on the difficulty to focus on results in this COVID-19 context. I'm seeing that the numbers are more or less stable now, and so I would like to thank you. I mean, that's about, out of the 150 that are participating, we have about 80 who have now answered this poll. And it's still moving a little bit, but not much. So I think we will be moving on. But just as a little reminder that to all of us, how difficult it is in a context where there are lockdowns, where people are working from their offices, from their homes, doing home office. We're having to rely on digital platforms, how difficult it is to really maintain our partnerships. And I think going forward, we want to place a particular emphasis at the global level, but also at the national level on making sure that our partnerships are inclusive. Because as the Vice Prime Minister has just said, this is critical if we want to resolve the problems that we are facing. So thank you for that. We'll end the polling there. And we will move on to the next part of our agenda, which is an interactive panel discussion. And I'm very pleased, delighted to have five distinguished panelists. His Excellency Mr. Slamet Sodarzano, the Deputy Minister of Political Affairs, Law, Defense and Security, the Ministry of National Development Planning Agency, Bappenas, Indonesia, will be our first speaker. And I would like to introduce him by asking a question of you, Excellency. One of the effectiveness principle is about the inclusiveness of development cooperation partnerships. We've just seen it in our poll. We saw how even half of the participants tend to say that this is the most challenged one. We understand among Bappena's current priorities is the strengthening of effective engagement of non-state actors and the private sector in development cooperation. Can you tell us how you are doing this and what are the challenges and opportunities you face to maximize impact and scale of such multi-stakeholder partnerships, especially in the current times when collective action is more important than ever? How could the global partnerships Kampala principles on effective private sector help guide these efforts? Giving you the floor, Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good night, good evening, Indonesian time. His Excellency Minister of Finance of Bangladesh, Her Excellency Ms. Elisa Monewe, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Planning, Democratic Republic of Congo, His Excellency Mr. Thomas Gass, Assistant Director General of Swiss Agency Development and Cooperation, Her Excellency Ms. Angela Ospina, Director of Presidential Agency of International Cooperation, Colombia, Her Excellency Ms. Sri Krishna, Joint Secretary of Ministry of Finance, Nepal, Her Excellency Ms. Monica Asuna, Head UN Agencies and Development Effectiveness Secretariat, National Treasury and Planning Kenya, His Excellency Mr. Mark Anglade, National Coordinator of the External Aid Mechanism Haiti. Good evening from Indonesia. It's my pleasure to be in this GBE-DC webinar to talk about countries' perspective to improve the quality of development cooperation and the effectiveness of development partnership. In this regard, allow me to share some key perspective from Indonesia. Government of Indonesia continuously works to improve the effectiveness of development to create bigger and more prevalent development impact, including in the international development cooperation initiatives. We always promote an equal and demand-driven development cooperation through the South-South and triangular cooperation activities. Indonesia recognizes the importance of SSDC framework to support mutual welfare of our partners in the southern countries as well as for the people of Indonesia. Excellencies, honorable participants, we recognize that the non-state actors will have more substantial role in the development process nowadays and future. Therefore, Bappenas develop strategies to increase the quality of non-state actor contribution in achieving development agenda. In 2019, Bappenas formulated grand design to enhance private sector engagements for SSTC. The grand design highlighted the importance of enabling an environment for the private sector engagement and the development cooperation, such as developing fiscal and monetary policies and revitalizing export financing institutions. The policy development will be carried out in the medium and long term. In our National Medium Term Development Plan 2020-2024, we set specific indicators that measure the level of non-state actors' participation in the international development cooperation. We expect that the participation rate of NSA can increase by 3% in 2024. Moreover, this year we are conducting a study of economic impact measurement on international development cooperation. Preliminary findings show high interest from non-state actors to take part in the development cooperation programs. Figures show that 98% of the respondents are interested in development cooperation activities facilitated by the government. Others show that the NSA engagement on the international development cooperation could increase the economic growth in the long run. It is very clear that what we are working on is in line with the Kampala Principle, which contains the concept of private sector engagement for international development cooperation. Nevertheless, the Kampala Principle will be adapted to the dynamic conditions that are developing in Indonesia. We also adopt other development cooperation principles, for example, the reverse linkage program. Excellencies, honorable participants, Indonesia has been promoting multi-stakeholders partnership approach for development cooperation activities. In 2019, we published the multi-stakeholder partnerships guidelines as an instrument for non-state actors' engagement in the development cycle. The guideline attempted to be institutionalized at provincial district level. We have conducted localized MSP as a part of SDGs activities in 18 provinces. Furthermore, in collaboration with UNESCAP, we are conducting joint activities to strengthen the multi-stakeholder partnership, particularly on documentation of good development practices that can be replicated in other areas or even collaborated with other countries. The joint activities also involve many stakeholders, including the parliamentary, CSOs, and the private sectors. Excellencies, honorable participants, the current unprecedented situation of COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized the needs to work together among all stakeholders due to limited resources to overcome the pandemic. There are some challenges to maximize the scale of partnership with non-state actors, among others, converging the interests of each stakeholder, which aim to avoid fragmented and non-integrative program among stakeholders. Then complementarity of approach to gather all resources available and sharing value to achieve the common goals, for example, Agenda 2030. The pandemic also further enables us to collaborate in fighting the crisis at the most effective way. The government of Indonesia decided to accelerate economic recovery and social reform as the main theme of the government's working plan for 2021. The recovery scenario would emphasize for development areas, namely the recovery of the industry, tourism, and investment sectors, reform of national health system, reform of social safety net system, and disaster resilience system. Last, I'd like to underline the message that inclusive and effective collaboration among stakeholders is a key element for responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Sharing of knowledge, lesson learned, and ideas will be the key factors in improving the best policy response, as well as discovering new innovative approaches during this pandemic era. With this, I have to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. And I'm very impressed by this mobilization that you have made together with the private sector around a common and shared vision around the 2030 agenda, the SDGs, but also your national development plans. And I think that this is so crucial if we want to have partnerships with the non-state actors, is to have a shared vision, a common vision. And also very impressed by this idea of quantitative objectives that you set with them, including that you are working on guidelines to actually strengthen that relationship. Thank you very much, Excellency. I would now like to move on to our next panelist, Ms. Catalina Quintero, Director of South-South Cooperation and Director General ad interim of the Presidential Agency of International Cooperation of Colombia. Ms. Quintero, you have the floor.
Okay, many thanks. Good hello and good morning, afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for inviting us to participate in this important webinar. I would like to talk about effectiveness and also the relation between effectiveness and South-South cooperation. So basically, I want to start talking about what does effectiveness means for us. Effectiveness for us in APC Colombia means doing more and doing better. As many of you are aware, middle and upper middle income countries such as Colombia need to be very effective and efficient in how we conduct our work, since we experience increased demand for participation in global spaces such as this, as the GPDC, but we are still very limited in the amount of resources, both human and financial, that we can dedicate to them. So based on this idea of effectiveness, I want to share with you our thoughts on how the 4 effectiveness principles had a relationship with South-South cooperation. So you can see on our slide a comparison between the South-South cooperation principles and the principles of the GPDC. Both sets of principles shares the common value of solidarity, which is urgent right now. So you can see here in the slide that the 4 principles of GPDC are just as equal as the principles of South-South cooperation. In the principle of South-South cooperation, we talk about respect for national sovereignty and ownership. In the GPDC, we talk about country ownership. On the principles of South-South cooperation, we talk about mutual accountability and transparency. In GPDC, transparency and accountability. In the principles of South-South cooperation, we talk about coordination of evidence and results-based initiatives. On GPDC, focus on results. And last, we talk on South-South cooperation partnerships among equals and GPDC, inclusive partnerships. Also, on South-South cooperations, we have other principles that I just going to read. Multi-stakeholder approach, mutual benefit, non-interference in domestic affairs, development effectiveness, and non-conditionality. So based on this comparison, our hypothesis for action area 2.3 is that we should be able to take advantage of these similarities in the principles to build national reporting frameworks that can help us provide information both to South-South spaces and also to the GPDC, thus improving the efficiency of our tools and expanding the reach of our information. So we expect to prove that monitoring our cooperation can help strengthen capacities. That is one of the main goals of the South-South cooperation and support the 2030 agenda. APC Colombia is a proponent of the management principle that you cannot manage what you cannot measure or monitor. Therefore, monitoring is a management tool valuable in both the South-South context and the GPDC context. Global South countries have a vision and a voice on how to monitor. Based on these ideas, on the similarities on principles of South-South cooperation and the principles of the GPDC, I want to share with you our thoughts on how the South-South cooperation could be used for other type of stakeholders and how can others learn from South-South cooperation. APC Colombia as lead of action area 2.3 will work with countries in different continents to develop and pilot an information framework that can provide data to highlight the commonalities of South-South cooperation and effectiveness. This can improve the efficiency of our reporting tools and also provide the GPDC with a window into debates around South-South cooperation that are common in other contexts and maybe are unknown to OECD or Northern debates. So based on this tricky message that I already mentioned, I want to focus on the last question that was asked to develop today. And it is, how can effective South-South cooperation help us to build back better and fast track the decade of action for SDG implementation? So based on these principles of South-South cooperation, South-South cooperation has promoted the principle of solidarity for over 40 years, promoting peer learning and technical exchanges even before those terms existed. All global South countries know there is a great value in pooling resources and promoting horizontal exchanges. We believe South-South cooperation in this experience has a lot to teach in the current situation. We need to keep promoting peer learning because some of our development issues are not solved with more funding, but with better ideas. Issues such as labor inclusion, improving information systems, public policy instruments to manage stakeholders in the context of the pandemic, for example, are improved with knowledge. The current COVID-19 situation has forced us to adapt our projects to the digital medium, as many other countries and many other agencies. We have 7 ongoing South-South cooperation projects with partners around the Global South, and we have managed to migrate 52 of them to virtual methodologies. We expect to complete 90% of those projects that were programmed to end in 2020. Sorry. Concluding, we have a lot of work ahead. COVID-19 has widened inequalities between the rich and poor. We also know that. And also we have been learning a lot about the gender gaps that has produced this COVID-19. To fast track the decade of action, we need to promote the 2030 agenda as a tool for project design. We already know how to identify which SDG our project is helping. That is, we already know that. But we need to impact specific indicators. To do this, we need better knowledge of the 2030 agenda and better information. A good monitoring exercise can provide us with key inputs to fine-tune these aspects. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Quintero. Thank you for building that bridge between the South-South cooperation and the development cooperation as a whole. I think that is a very valuable action area 2.3. And we very much look forward to the results that will come out of this action area. We note also that just as the ministry from Bangladesh did early on, you also really underscore the importance of monitoring. It's true, we cannot manage what we cannot measure. And so thank you for spearheading this important area on behalf of the GPEDC. I would now like to move to the next panelist, and that is the Joint Secretary of the Ministry of Finance of Nepal, Mr. Sri Krishna Nepal. Mr. Nepal, welcome, and you have the floor. I'm asking you, maybe I'll give you first a question. Recently, you have led the establishment of a COVID-19 portal within the Aid Management Information System. So this is all about data and putting data at the center of that relationship between the different development stakeholders. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this portal has helped you respond to the pandemic and how you have been using and sharing this data? Over to you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good to see you after a long time. Distinguished co-chairs, excellencies, participants and colleagues, please accept my warm greetings from Kathmandu. I would like to thank GPEDC for providing me this opportunity. Nepal is a long-time advocate of effective development cooperation, and we firmly believe that sharing the country-specific experiences and figuring out relevant interventions would support to collectively advocate for better action. In our commitment to effectiveness, we have participated in all 3 global partnership monitoring rounds, as well as the preceding Paris Declaration monitoring surveys and evaluations. The results of the most recent monitoring round highlight persistent effectiveness challenges. The first challenge I would like to share today is about country ownership. In line with global findings, Nepal's 2019 monitoring result shows that despite the highest strength of national development planning capacity, development partners alignment still leaves room for improvement, particularly at the target and indicator level. Similarly, use of country-owned data and monitoring systems is low and has decreased in recent years. This consequently contributes to the high level of fragmentations of development cooperation in Nepal. Alignment to national priorities coupled with strong coordinations can reduce fragmentations, avoid the duplications of efforts, and facilitating collective actions on priority areas. This, however, remains a challenge. Similarly, recent monitoring results also point to significant challenges in the medium-term predictability of the development cooperation. High quality and timely information on development cooperation is essential planning and managing resources for results and can guide development partners in coordinating their support with other partners. In the absence of forward-looking information on the development financing and with limited alignment to national priorities, Nepal's ability to gain full ownership over its development results is weakened. To address these enduring challenges, we have undertaken significant steps to continually strengthen our development cooperation architecture. This architecture is made of structures and systems that aim to ensure that cooperation is aligned to our priorities and development planning and implementation are well coordinated. The International Development Cooperation Policy adopted in 2019 is the cornerstone of this architecture. This is fully aligned with the effectiveness principle. It sets out government priorities along with the modalities of mobilizing development cooperation. It explores the possibility of maximizing development finance through using innovative financing solutions. In 2019, the government launched a new management information system that centralizes and standardizes information on development cooperation flows as a means to strengthen oversight and contributions over the resources and also to evaluate results. Building on the information collected through this system, the Ministry of Finance prepares an annual development cooperation report. It is a tool to promote transparency and accountability, as well as providing an entry point for dialogue on how to strengthen cooperation among stakeholders, ensuring all development resources in the country are used effectively for maximum development impact. Nepal's development cooperation architecture has now been proved essential in light of COVID-19. The pandemic has had devastating impacts on all aspects of life for all people. The immediate health emergency is coupled with long-term social and economic effects that exacerbate pre-existing development issues and threaten hard-fought social economic achievements. The best way, in my opinion, is to partner with all stakeholders and adopt whole of the society approach to create synergy. Key to maintaining country ownership in this time is time of crisis is providing resources in a way that allows flexibility to the government to allocate in the areas of high priority, as well as providing credible and timely data on pipeline and next step disbursement. The Ministry of Finance has established a COVID-19 portal within the underlying AMIS. As you were raising, moderator, the issue, like I'm going to share some of the information about this new portal. This new portal aims to collect information on partner support and interventions related to response and recovery. When this data is available, we are able to identify gaps and direct resources in a way that ensures an inclusive and sustainable recovery that leaves no one behind. It is noteworthy that we have found high level of compliance from the development partners. It has been very useful for short-term resource planning to align with country priorities and to harmonize activities. Going forward, as resources remain constraints, we call upon our development partners to continue repurposing and restructuring ongoing portfolios in view of COVID-19 response and recovery, leveraging additional resources, providing information through the new portal, fully trust the government for its ownership of ongoing crisis-related efforts, and share the good practices to support the coordinated response that puts us back on track towards the SDG while leaving no one behind. With this, let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for really placing information at the center. It's true that providing good information basis is key to mobilize multi-stakeholder partnerships, but it is also important for our efforts to align, and also to focus on results. So in a sense, information is very much at the heart of the development effectiveness principles. Thank you very much. Also, thank you particularly for being able to join us. I know that now in Nepal you have the Dasain Festival, and so thanks for joining us on your holiday today. My next speaker, I'm delighted to introduce Ms. Monica Asuna, Head of the UN Agencies and Development Effectiveness Secretariat at the Directorate of Public Debt Management Office at the National Treasury and Planning in Kenya. And Ms. Monica Asuna, Kenya has an established mechanism for improving development effectiveness. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted how has it impacted development cooperation? Have you seen changes in development cooperation practices? How are you using the principles of effective development cooperation to improve how government and partners work together? What do you expect others to do? You have the floor, Ms. Asuna.
Yeah, thank you so much. Moderator, His Excellency Mr. Thomas Gas, Your Excellencies, the GPDC co-chairs, and also thank you to the Joint Support Team for inviting Kenya to be a speaker in this panel. Let me first start by saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our participants, wherever you are. And I'm delighted to be here, and it's a privilege and an honor. So let me start by saying that the COVID-19 pandemic has made development cooperation a bit difficult. It hasn't been easy. It has slowed down a lot of activities in the development arena. And but I must underscore that our development cooperation per se is still effective to a great extent, because Kenya has a well-defined development effectiveness coordination structure, which is still intact. I must admit that to some extent it slowed our activities in terms of how we regularly meet. So the meetings at least also slowed down, but we still had a way of reaching out to our development partners when there was need. So what we did is that when this pandemic struck and we reported the first case in Kenya, then there was a call to our development partners to support the government in mitigating the impact of this COVID-19. So what we did is that since new resources was not readily available, so we had a discussion with our partners, and what we did is we reallocated some of the resources from the ongoing programs to mitigate the pandemic. And this is best because there was a slowdown in operations. So there were some activities which we could not implement. So based on that, we reallocated resources. And I must say that our partners were very responsive, and at least we got resources at that time that the government used to mitigate. Also, what also we did is that there was also a flash appeal by the UN agencies, and also the UN agencies also reallocated funds to mitigate this. So most of these resources which were allocated was to provide the necessary infrastructure that we needed in the health sector, equipment to the health personnel, supplies, and also to just arrest the situation. Also, the government opened a COVID-19 response fund, where there was an invite to the private sector, the civil society, the foundations, and the general public to respond. And there was a generous response from across the board. And that fund also raised some resources, which most of it was for social protection, among others, taking note that this pandemic led to a lot of loss of jobs, and most people were in dire need of social protection. So far, that is what we did. So the changes in development cooperation that we are seeing is that for Kenya, it is more aligned development support, because even in this mitigation of the COVID-19 pandemic, it was discussion with government and directing the resources where the government really needed it most. So our response was more coordinated and also aligned to the national priorities. We are also seeing out that in this period, the government was also reaching out to non-state actors, especially the private sector and also the foundations. I must underscore that we didn't have a proper coordinated framework of reaching out to the civil society. So that is an area that I think going forward, we really need to work around. There was a lot of interest from the civil society, but the support was not coordinated. But most of them also supported the government in the communities through the community-based organizations, and they created awareness. Because one most important thing about this pandemic is that to the grassroots communities, there must be awareness raising, because most people were just living as, it's just a normal flu, everything is normal, you know, life is just as usual. So you have to tell them that you have to social distance, you know, you have to wash your hands, you have to wear a mask. Wearing a mask in some communities is still a problem. So I think that is something that may affect the containment of this pandemic going forward. But then the civil society was key in some communities in awareness raising and giving even the like water tanks and you know, soap for them to be able to wash their hands. The media has also been instrumental in awareness raising. So in terms of our development cooperation, also going forward, we see that right now we are working with the UN agencies. The UN agencies has the socio-economic response plan, and it has 5 pillars. And this, we hope it's going to, in the theme of building back better, come 2021. So we are trying to program around those principles, which is health first, protecting people, economic response and recovery, macroeconomic response and multilateral cooperation, social cohesion, and community resilience. So going forward, we hope that they'll align better to our national priorities. I think just maybe in terms of also underscoring that the EDC principles, the effective development cooperation principles, are still very relevant and need to be applied by all countries. So that is something that I would expect others to do better. We need to continue to ensure alignment and directing resources as per where we really want it. And countries need to have a national development plan in place where now our partners can align to. Because if we don't have that, then we end up with a misalignment. And then also, we need to also have the COVID response support also needs to be discussed and agreed upon by government. You know, there are instances where there are some partners who go direct and start implementing without engaging government. That's where we find there's misalignment. So at least everyone to really be on board and then work together with the government. As the government of Kenya will continue focusing on results, transparency, and accountability, which is key. Another major key issue is the inclusive development partnerships. I think bringing on board our key stakeholders. For example, for Kenya being a lower middle income country, we are seeing that the concessionality of the loans is not as before. And also we are not receiving more grants because of our status. So in the inclusive development partnerships, then we tap into those diverse resources that we've never tapped before. So every partner, non-state actor or government will be really critical going forward to ensure economic stability and bridge the budget deficit gaps. And for us, the budget deficit is really something that is now widening with the impact of the COVID-19. So in summary, or as I wind up, I need to mention that as the government, we are also doing economic recovery strategy post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy, which is in the pipeline for the next medium-term plan. So this one, we hope our partners will align to once it is fully developed. So in summary, governments or partners must align to the national development priorities. There must be a focus on results, and dialogue is really important. Multi-stakeholder dialogue or bilateral dialogue, that is important so that we direct resources where it is needed. So thank you so much. That is my submission.
Thank you so much, Ms. Asuna, and thank you for just reminding us that as the effectiveness principles are key, the alignment in the moment of crisis means alignment to priorities that might change and that might have to adapt to a rapid response mode. And it's interesting that you said that, because within the OECD, you know that within the GPDC, I represent the partners from the OECD. We have frequently discussed recently how important it is to continue to stay on the ground even during this COVID-19 crisis, and as development partners to stay in the countries so that we can help and be listening to that dialogue that you're talking about and respond to the needs and avoid that kind of humanitarization of development cooperation that you were mentioning. Thank you also for underscoring the importance of reaching out not just to the private sector, but also to the CSOs, and that for both of these groups, there's really a need for a strong effort. As we move on, I have a great pleasure now to introduce the National Coordinator of External Aid Mechanism in Haiti, Mr. Marc Anglade. Mr. Anglade, you were at the forefront of coordinating the 2018 effectiveness monitoring round in your country. What has happened since then? How has your government disseminated and used the results to implement the effectiveness principles with development partners and other stakeholders, and what has changed? And what will it take to further strengthen the cooperation and dialogue structure in Haiti, and what support is needed from different actors? Monsieur Anglade, you have the floor. Monsieur Anglade?
Merci, monsieur le modérateur. Bonjour à tous. Je vous remercie pour cette opportunité et je profite aussi pour saluer les interventions de tout un chacun qui ont été en fait très enrichissantes. Ainsi, dire merci à l'équipe conjointe de l'OCDE pour leur formidable travail. La participation au troisième round du monitoring était en fait totalement d'identifier
Monsieur Anglade, nous vous entendons pas. Je crois que la connexion est assez faible. Est-ce que je peux suggérer peut-être pour le temps de votre intervention d'éteindre votre caméra? Peut-être que ça peut améliorer la bande passante. Mais en restant... Voilà.
Alors, on m'excuse, l'Internet a fait lâcher. Alors, je disais que la participation au troisième round du monitoring de Busan était importante, fondamentale pour Haïti. Et en fait, les goulots de tremblement avaient été déjà identifiés, mais cet exercice allait permettre de donner un aperçu objectif de la mise en œuvre. La question des résultats, en fait, est intervenue dans un contexte de grande instabilité politique en Haïti, malheureusement, et avec un gouvernement provisoire qui était en place, avec pour mandat uniquement de faire conjugué à une succession de turbulences. Les résultats ont su ce contexte-là un leadership alors de trouver capital.
Monsieur Anglade, I think we have lost Mr. Anglade again. I'm in the interest of time, I want to move forward with the program, and if we get him later, I'm going to give him the floor briefly again. Now, we have two eminent discussants that I'm going to be asking to react to what we've heard right now. But before doing that, I want to encourage you also to think about questions and remarks that you might have about what has just been said. You've just heard a number of colleagues and leaders from different countries on how they have been dealing with the crisis and what the development effectiveness principles have meant in that context. And I'm sure that many of you have either questions or comments that you would like to do with that. Now, what we would like to suggest, we don't have the time for 150 people to ask questions and make comments now, but we will ask you to place those questions and comments in the chat, and the joint support team is going to place those comments and questions into a table, and we are going to play them back to you in that table. We're going to send it back to all the participants within about a week or two from this meeting, so that you can all benefit from the questions and the thoughts that will have emerged around this discussion. So I'll be asking you to place your questions, your comments into the chat, and the joint support team is going to collect them. I don't think that, because the time is moving quite rapidly, I don't think that we will be able to actually give the floor to other participants after these two discussants. I'm going to then go back for a last minute to the panel. So please do use the chat to put your questions, your comments about the implications of the COVID-19 crisis for the use of the development effectiveness principles. What does it mean? Are they helpful? Where are they challenged? So that being said, I'm now delighted to introduce an eminent person that all of you, or many of you, probably know already, and it's a great delight for me to introduce Debapriya Bhattacharya, the chair of Southern Voice, and who has been a strong supporter of the GPEDC, but of development effectiveness already long before even GPEDC existed. Deb, it's great to have you with us here on the panel. Can you give us your thoughts about what you've heard and some of the challenges that were shared today? Over to you.
Excellency, thank you very much for inviting me to this very, very important and I would say very timely session, and a bold session, of course. I have been listening with rapt attention to all the eminent speakers who have been saying. speaking here. So all protocols observed, Excellencies, friends, colleagues. Let me come straight to the three issues which was raised earlier by the chair. One is about the new challenges to development cooperation, the implications of the COVID-19, and then what is the experience with mobilization of the development cooperation. So these are the three issues. In my 3-4 minutes, I will try to blend these three issues with the evidence which I have from the grounds at this moment based on a study which I am completing on the impact of COVID on development cooperation in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. So I'll be very brief, and it's a headline information which I'll be sharing with you. So let me first look at the landscape. What really changed within the landscape of development cooperation since COVID came in February, March this year? The landscape, I look at it from the prism of the flow of financial resources and new financial resources between March and September 2020. So if you see there, the topmost line of financing had been the multilateral sources. The multilateral sources, in particular, the international financial institutions and IMF included. Along with that came in the regional development banks and other, Islamic Development Bank and other funds. So multilateral sources of financing had been dominant. And my broad assessment is it was about 2/3 of all the financial flows during the COVID period, at least on the country level recipient data. Bilateral providers have been a bit subdued because they themselves have been quite seized by the crisis. But what they have tried to do is some kind of retooling or reprogramming of that kind of activity, their existing finance in certain ways. What was important also to note is that innovative ways the South-South cooperation emerged and emerged both as bilaterals more through the health-related, epidemic-related support mechanism, and the multilateral more through the traditional banking system, particularly the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank here. And they came in also not only in terms of project aid or the COVID-related, but also with budgetary support. So the three forms of support which we see in all these countries are number one, the emergency COVID-related support. The number two is the COVID built-in embedded sectoral support on entrepreneurship and digitalization or social protection, all these things. And the third is budgetary support. What is important to note is that for the first time, we had been seeing that some of the bilaterals have been coming out with budgetary support, and Japan in particular. This is a new phenomenon which the budgetary support, there had been the bilaterals moving out back, but then they have come in these cases over there. So, and the other new thing which we also noted, the multilaterals were providing grants in response to the COVID circumstances. And the multilaterals, what was important is to see they not only used or adapted their old facilities, the fast response facilities, but also they created new COVID pandemic response facilities as well. So the turnaround had been tremendously fast. It is really very interesting to see how the multilateral flow of finance gathered new sources, the new essence and new relevance in this current context as it goes, particularly when the bilaterals were subdued and a bit seized with their own problems in these cases, and supported by the New South in certain ways, particularly the Southern multilateral. Now, what happened to the GPEDC principles while this was happening? So we had a look at this, and we see what has happened is that a stronger support for the on the ownership part. The country people, the recipients, with being attacked by this pandemic in certain ways, ambushed by the pandemic, they have somehow took over their responsibilities much more stronger than the traditional project aid financing GPEDC circumstances. So we have seen stronger show of ownership. We have also seen stronger, or the further deepening of alignment and harmonization, because not new projects were was not as such created. The old projects were adapted in certain ways, and new projects were either add on to the old ones in that way. So the alignments and the harmonization process also took a bit more positive, I think, support in that. But the coordination was a nightmare. There are three forms of coordinations. One form of coordination is that amongst the donors themselves, among the development partners. The second one was between the development partners and the recipient governments. And the third one, within the government itself. I think the third one was the most critical one. Within the government itself was not necessarily at the best of the play. So they created a bit of a challenge. And within the donor coordination, our study shows that it had been more stronger in case of health, not necessarily for other areas as it goes in certain ways. And there were bigger bilateral donors who took more ownership in certain areas, in health, education, or certain where they had sector-wide programs and over there. The last point on the ground principle is the assessment framework. Unfortunately, the old existing established assessment framework was still moving on. They did have result framework with the new form of financing coming in, but unfortunately, there was data issue, huge data issue. Benchmarking was not always done before doing things because there was no time for that. And as a result, we have seen that the demand, there had been bigger appetite for result-based assessment, although there was no ex ante as such exercises on there, and we will have to see how ex post things are going to happen over there. What were the challenges? The challenges were the capacity issue, as you can understand, and people were getting sick, people were getting transferred, and people were totally not aware about many things. Particularly high level of digitization took place during this time. So this was a new challenge to the capacity for certain people. Lack of coordination, I have already mentioned. Emergency response demanded more flexibility, and that really had a trade-off with transparency and effectiveness or accountability. So transparency and accountability traded off with the flexibility and faster responsiveness and procurement exercises as it goes. As I mentioned, more flexible conditions, retooling, reprogramming quite a lot, ex post results assessment, more demands for coordination now at this moment. And what is coming through now, that we cannot really handle the challenges of development cooperation and development effectiveness in particular without getting into systemic reforms within the country. The relationship between the systemic reforms, whether it is public administration or it is the financial sector, capital market, or local government, all these things are coming in because development cooperation is now connected to social protection and delivery of health, not only health in emergencies, but also allowances, fiscal support, cash transfers. So the issue of systemic concern, the broader macroeconomic management is now being more understood, the relationship between the development effectiveness debate. Development effectiveness debate, unfortunately, still do not have adequate political traction as we would have liked to see in that way. To conclude, I think what is happening is that we are seeing that new types of instruments are emerging, new hybrid instruments are emerging. We will have to really think through how it is much beyond the blended finance issue, much beyond than OOF or the private philanthropy here, many hybrid types. The development effectiveness agenda at this moment still do not have political traction much, and we need to reinterpret some of the principles of GPEDC in the new condition. I think this is now demanding more, more creative, nuanced interpretation within the context as it goes. So my concluding line is that COVID, yes, as they say, every disaster has a silver lining. I think it has given, the silver lining is that it has given GPEDC a new opportunity to do the introspection and rediscovery, taking the messages of, as I would call, GPEDC 2.0, if Thomas will remember, for the Seoul days. And this is, a great opportunity to capitalize on the experience of COVID and give a new leash of life to the GPEDC, not only to the agenda, but also to the structure. Thank you very much for listening to me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that very differentiated view and analysis of what has happened to all of us over the last 9 months. I think it's interesting. You have really been able to show us where the silver part of the lining is and where the more grayer part of the cloud has been. You underscored how maybe alignment was rapid, and how certain financing instruments, we were able to use them rapidly, but at the same time, of course, coordination, transparency, accountability. Those are some of the important principles or qualities that sometimes fell to the side somewhat. Thank you for reminding us again that it's really our task to define this 2.0, development effectiveness 2.0. Actually, we are going to, as a steering committee, we are going to suggest that we use the year 2021 to do a series of national dialogues precisely on these questions that actually ask the kind of questions you've just been asking, but in a systemic way, since we are not going to do the traditional monitoring exercise that we've been doing every year. So in lieu of that monitoring exercise, that is what we want to be doing. But I'll say a little more about that just now. In the meantime, thank you for those thoughts. And I just want to remind all the participants that you can ask questions, you can give comments, and we are going to compile those questions and comments in a table that will be sent to you all, over the next couple of weeks. I now want to give the floor to Ms. Mayor Matthews, the Senior Development Specialist of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Ireland. Also, as a discussant, Ms. Matthews, what thoughts have you had listening to these different experiences at the national level, the analysis of Dr. Bhattacharya? What are your thoughts? May I give you the floor, Ms. Matthews?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting Ireland to comment. And I'm very humbled as one of representing one of the donor countries to hear the perspective, I think, of such a wide range of countries and the different responses to COVID and how it has impacted on the development effectiveness agenda. All protocols observed, and let me just also comment on the last speaker. I think the insights in terms of the overview of the impact would certainly resonate very strongly with what we're experiencing in Ireland in terms of feedback from many of our partners and partner governments on the ground. Ireland has and is very committed to the development effectiveness principles. We've just participated in a DAC peer review just 2 weeks ago, where Ireland came out strong in terms of commitment to development effectiveness, but I suppose, like many other donors, not as strong as it's been in the past. And I think that's we need to understand why that is, and what are the issues and what are the challenges that we need to address collectively in order to address those. And I think COVID in many ways is providing, just as our last speaker said, a real opportunity to look at both the challenges that were there before COVID and now how has COVID either exacerbated some of those issues, but also I think to again echo that point made that maybe there is some silver lining that we're seeing now with COVID. So just to echo that. Ireland, as I said, has a strong record and is a good behaving donor in terms of development effectiveness. Again, I'm not going to talk again about the impacts that many have eloquently spoken about, and it's really useful to hear from the country perspective what those impacts are. But in terms of how it is impacted on Ireland and our performance as a donor, I think maybe I'll just talk a little bit to that. And again, to echo the picture that we heard from the last speaker in terms of how we've had to pivot, be flexible in our response has been a point that we've really been working hard on. We've just done a brief assessment of how that's impacted over the last 6 months in particular. We're seeing our aid volumes stay at this level they were, but we're looking at real flexibility, changing in how we're orienting some of those funds. We are lucky in that we are quite able to respond quickly and flexibly to demands. So we are seeing that our commitments to government have stayed as they were. However, we have been pivoting somewhat more resources towards the UN agencies in their work in leading on the COVID national response, or supporting government's national response, I should say. Interestingly, we have the main changes have been in our support to civil society, because many of those were not able to continue work as had previously been the case, or as they had planned, due to a lot more operational problems that they faced on the ground. I think there's a real danger, and I suppose a worry for everybody, and again, our last speaker spoke about the bilateral donors, given that we all have huge domestic needs now arising from COVID. What is going to be the overall impact in terms of aid volumes for the next couple of years? Really pleased to say that our budget just a week ago for 2021 has been announced, and we're particularly pleased that we've been able to actually have a small increase in the total development cooperation budget for next year. So, I mean, many of us were wondering what would happen, but I think our Minister of Foreign Affairs, our Taoiseach, our Prime Minister, really feel that this is an opportunity to show global solidarity. And I think that's a key point, that COVID really is something that's illustrating that we are all in this together. It's a global, and some of the speakers earlier spoke about this being a global challenge, and that it's going to take global resources and global cooperation if we're all going to be safe, and if all of our economies are going to pull through this. So I think that is an opportunity, again, to bring us all back to the table. And I think, you know, it would be an opportunity to look at, again, just to illustrate the point made around coordination in the health sector. At the DAC peer review there, we presented the example from Ireland's experience in Mozambique, where, you know, we were, although we are a very small donor, we were able, through our relationship already that existed with the Ministry of Finance, or the Ministry of Health in Mozambique, to drive a coalition building for a coherent response with government and across the international community. And we were involved in, we were able to bring together partners that normally wouldn't be cooperating so closely, the UN agencies, the World Bank, the Africa Development Fund, and the IMF, to work together with the EU and the private sector to set up an international community COVID-19 task force, the ICCT in Mozambique. And that task force worked really closely with the government of Mozambique to build a national COVID-19 response, led by the Mozambican Prime Minister. And I think this is an important point, because Mozambique has gone through its own turmoils in terms of development cooperation. It had a fairly bruising experience around budget support just a couple of years ago. And I think what this is illustrating is that COVID can provide a new opportunity to kind of rebuild, to come back to the table, and to work together closely. So I think, you know, there are opportunities to build out of it, yet it's sector support, and we are seeing right across the board, the health sector has really pulled together and, you know, has reinforced that coordination and the dialogue mechanisms that we're seeing of many countries. But I think that should be an opportunity for us to look how we can broaden that out beyond just the health sector. So I do see hope. And I think it's a credit to both governments and the donors that they have pulled together and that they will continue to work very closely together. So I think that's really important. Again, I think it'll be important, as we do look at the kind of reform that we've been hearing about, that we also take stock of what wasn't working before. You know, and I think we need to face up to them and to see how best we work together. Ireland, for example, is a small to medium-sized donor. And I think what we're experiencing is that we want to see development cooperation as part of a wider series of relationships and engagement at country level, beyond development cooperation. It involves political engagement, it involves our economic engagement, our cultural engagement, and that this needs to be driven as a whole. And it's about, I suppose, what we're saying, it's about more than the money. So we heard there from colleagues talking about South-South cooperation, around technical support, about knowledge sharing. How are we going to, in our new way of working together, bring these issues to the forefront of our development effectiveness agenda? It's not just about, it's effectiveness in the broader realm. And how do we measure that? How do we give that some substance? And because long term, we're seeing aid volumes are dropping. Countries aren't the percentage of aid in terms of total national resources is declining. But at the same time, I think we see big opportunities for other than aid, and looking to see how we can best do that. And I think the South-South cooperation example that we heard of actually provides really interesting examples of how we might do that better. So yes, so again, feeding into a whole of government, whole of society agenda. And we would like to see that the new model of development effectiveness that does emerge reflects a broader approach, including the quality of relationships. But we do see that the key principles that we already have as being core to all of that, how we explain and understand them, I think is something that we have to work on. Thank you very much, Chair, and sorry for taking some time. I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those thoughts. Thank you for reminding us that we are finding new ways of working together. And I think you've pointed to some really interesting aspects. The one which was also mentioned by Dr. Bhattacharya is this responsiveness, which I think we were all surprised that we were able to be so responsive and agile, and maybe that should teach us something. The other aspect which you mentioned, and I'm glad you did, was that even though the percentage of aid in regard to the economies of these developing countries is reducing, the capacity and for solidarity is actually still there. We experienced the same in Switzerland. We've just gone through our parliament with our new budget, and 6 months ago, everybody was saying, "Oh, they're going to reduce your development cooperation budget," but lo and behold, it did not happen. And there is a sense this pandemic has also reminded us how connected we are beyond our borders and how important global solidarity is. At the same time, you have pointed to also some of the weak points, and I think we need to be aware of that. And maybe we can add the point that you mentioned to the several points that Dr. Bhattacharya already mentioned, namely the fabric of the civil society at the local level and how that has been impacted by these changes, and the fact that a lot of the development cooperation all of a sudden has gone through bigger players, more centralized, what I like to call a humanitarization of development cooperation. And we need to be careful that fabric, that social fabric, and the relationship between duty bearers and rights holders is not weakened by our new way of working. I think that this will give me I'm looking at the time, and it's giving me a good segue to give the floor to my friend and co-chair, Vitalis Medja, from the non-executive group of the co-chairs. I want to, before giving him the floor, I want to just thank already all the people who have added questions and comments into the chat. I want to encourage you all to use that still. It's still going to be open for about a quarter of an hour, and you can add questions and comments, and we will provide a table with these comments to you within the next 2 weeks in order to continue this dialogue beyond this virtual session right now. The second thing that I would like to remind before giving the floor to Vitalis is that we will, as co-chairs, be engaging all the members of the GPEDC for a country-level action through partnership dialogue, which we hope will be taking place next year, 2021, so that we, as a basis for the high-level meeting that will take place in 2022, that we have a very strong report on the table about how the COVID-19 crisis has led us to work differently, if I can paraphrase the previous speaker, and has given us a basis for a development effectiveness 2.0, as was said before as well. So we will be engaging with you in this, and we will be encouraging members of the GPEDC to hold dialogues at the national level, to look back at the 2018 monitoring round, to see how things have changed since then, and to reflect particularly on the effect of the COVID crisis and on some of these responses and effects that you have seen now that you have heard now from our eminent speakers. I would like to now give the floor to Vitalis Medja and ask him to, I'm just giving and ask him to do some concluding remarks and maybe tell us the way forward. Major, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, fellow co-chair, Thomas Gas, and my other co-chairs from Bangladesh and DRC. Indeed, it is really our pleasure to have this meeting. It is the first one, and we are really glad to have you join this meeting. Indeed, the question around the impact of COVID on our work, and also really to the issue around how we are translating the monitoring into results at the country level, remains really at the center of ensuring that we continue to really keep our hand on the pulse and ensure that we are still relevant in terms of the objectives and the commitments that we put for ourselves. And I really want to thank the eminent speakers and also the discussants who have really brought out key issues that we need to consider going forward, but also that we need to share and learn from each other in terms of how we adjust, especially in these times of the pandemic. I think I don't have a lot to say, but I just want to highlight 3 or 4 things that we need to think about. First, I think that it is really important that we have this webinar series, and as co-chairs, this is one of the steps and measures that we want to continue taking in order to ensure that we are in touch with each other, but also provide sufficient forum for engagement and dialogue with you throughout this season, this program period of 2020-2022. As a matter of fact, there are 2 already planned webinars that we would like to invite you to start considering to engage in. The first one being one on the private sector, especially with regard to the issues of taking forward the work on the Kampala Principle. As you've heard, in the context of the pandemic, the role of private sector has been mentioned, and indeed trying to make them relevant in the context of the Development Effectiveness Principle will really make it will make it easy for us to to harvest the benefits of partnering with the private sector going forward. Civil society, as you know, also, and as you've heard from the from various speakers, especially during this pandemic, are not really have not been captured well in the structure of implementation. And so, as such, there are concerns around addressing the shrinking space question that was raised in 2018. They are also planning a webinar to really discuss how best we can address the effectiveness both from the civil society side, but also from the shrinking space perspective going forward. So there are two already planned webinars that we shall be sending forward to you, details on how to take that forward. Lastly, I think what is really important for us to think about going is that what this discussion presents to us is that we need to really remain and stick to the objectives and remain on the race for implementing the key objectives of the GPDC. The principles are still very relevant and indeed can contribute to strengthening our response to COVID. Therefore, it's really key that we continue with that agenda, especially with regard to allocation of resources, with regard to how we are strengthening partnerships across the board, including also civil society. I think that will be very key going forward. I think what also this presents to us, and especially going forward in how we want to strengthen partnership, we want to strengthen country dialogue and transforming the results of the monitoring into action at the national level, we need to be very inclusive in that aspect of work. And particularly looking at all the stakeholders of the GPDC, be it private sector, be it parliament, be it foundation and civil society, all this whole society approach must really be reflected in our intervention and in our action in terms of not only translating those recommendations into country action, but also in our interventions on the COVID pandemic. Lastly, is really we really have to make sure that when we are implementing the principles, that we are true to the cause, so that we move beyond just country ownership and ensure that we have a whole society ownership. And in that regard, I'm talking about, because when the pandemic struck, everybody moved to emergency mode, and of course, the government structures took over. I think now that we have discovered that we need everybody's hand on the deck, it is important that we set out relevant structures that captures contributions of all the stakeholders. I think we've had how civil society are contributing to the community level. We've had the potential of raising resources from the private sector. We know also foundations are contributing largely with regard to resources, but also in research on vaccination. So all these actors, indeed, this pandemic shows that GPDC is the most relevant structure and platform through which we can learn to work together and find collective solutions to our development challenges. With that in mind, I think it's really, as your co-chairs, we are very keen to continue working with you. We are currently, like one speaker said, we are currently carrying out a number of reviews, including how to make monitoring more responsive to your country needs, in terms of transforming the GPDC structure to be more responsive also for our own context, in order to not only be able to address the country level challenges, but also the global challenge of making sure we achieve SDGs. So we are very sensitive to your quest for the changes and for the reforms, and that's why I think I want to echo the statements of my colleague Thomas Garr, saying that please do send out your questions and your ideas on how you feel we need to adjust and which elements we need to adjust in order to ensure that we indeed responding to the country needs. Having said that, I really want to thank everybody for your participation, for your time, for your contributions to the success of this meeting. And I wish us all the best in our future endeavors, and may you all remain safe and healthy. I don't know if Thomas, you want to say something.
Thank you so much, Meja, and thank you. I want to just echo your own thanks and the ones of all the co-chairs for our brilliant panelists and for everyone who has participated. And I'm seeing still questions and remarks coming in. And this is just the beginning of an intense discussion that we're going to have with you. And we look forward to staying in touch over these coming months. So thank you, and have a good evening or rest of the day for those who are in the Western Hemisphere. Thank you for your participation. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Merci.
Thank you. Bye-bye.